You're talking about something completely ordinary. Then, almost without thinking, she says, "Can I tell you something I've never really told anyone?" The conversation changes. Not because she revealed some life-changing secret, but because in that moment, she stopped protecting a part of herself. I've always found that interesting. Real closeness rarely begins with a grand, romantic gesture. It begins when someone slowly starts trusting you with pieces of themselves they don't hand to everyone else. Those moments are quiet, easy to miss, but if you pay attention, they often tell you exactly where you stand. And I think the first one is the foundation for all the others. Number 1, she starts sharing the thoughts she normally keeps to herself. There's a difference between telling someone about your day and letting them hear what's been living in your mind. One is information, the other is trust. At first, your conversations are probably like anyone else's. Work, family, what happened over the weekend, the movie she watched, the restaurant she wants to try. Those conversations are comfortable, but they don't necessarily tell you how someone feels. Then, without either of you planning it, something begins to change. She starts saying things that don't really have easy answers. "I've been overthinking something. I don't know why this keeps bothering me. Can I ask you something without you judging me?" Or maybe she pauses before speaking and says, "This is going to sound strange." Those little sentences might not seem important, but I've always believed they're some of the biggest turning points in a relationship. Because she's no longer sharing events, she's sharing her inner conversation. The thoughts she argues with herself about, the questions she hasn't figured out yet, the opinions she's worried people might misunderstand. Think about how rare that actually is. Everyone has thoughts they edit before they speak, not because they're hiding something, because they're protecting something. Sometimes it's an insecurity. Sometimes it's a dream they're almost embarrassed to admit. Sometimes it's simply a fear of sounding foolish. So when someone stops editing every thought before sharing it with you, they're giving you much more valuable than information. They're giving you access. I've noticed that emotional intimacy doesn't usually arrive all at once. It grows in moments like these. A conversation that lasts a little longer than expected. A silence that doesn't feel uncomfortable. A thought that could have stayed inside her head, but somehow finds its way into yours instead. The interesting part is, she isn't asking you to solve everything. In fact, some of the deepest conversations aren't looking for solutions at all. She's not saying, "Fix this for me." She's saying, "I trust you enough to let you see this part of me." And those are two very different things. Of course, one conversation doesn't mean she's already chosen you. Some people are naturally open. Others find it easy to talk about almost anything. That's why it's never about one moment. It's about the pattern. Over time, you realize she isn't just telling you what happened. She's telling you what she's been thinking when no one else was around. The conversation becomes less about the world outside and more about the world inside her mind. I've always thought that's one of the quietest ways someone says, "You matter to me." Not with a confession, not with a dramatic speech, but by letting you hear the thoughts that never make it into ordinary conversations. And once someone begins trusting you with their inner world, something else starts happening almost without either of you noticing. You stop hearing only about the important moments. Somehow, you begin becoming part of the ordinary ones too. And that's where the second sign quietly begins.
Number 2, she starts letting you into her ordinary life. I've always believed there's a big difference between someone making time for you and someone naturally making you part of their day. At first, the conversations usually happen for a reason. Someone has a question. Something exciting happened. There's a story to tell. But then, without either of you realizing it, the reasons slowly disappear. She sends you a picture of the coffee she almost spilled on her way to work. She laughs about getting stuck in traffic for 30 minutes. She tells you she finally finished the book she'd been putting off for weeks. None of those moments are important. That's exactly why they matter. I've heard people say, why would anyone care about something that small? The truth is, they probably wouldn't, unless that person had quietly become part of their life. Think about the people you're closest to. You don't only tell them the big news, you tell them the little things. The awkward conversation you had at the supermarket, the dog you saw on your morning walk, the meal that didn't turn out the way you expected. Not because those moments are remarkable, but because sharing them feels natural. I've always thought that's how emotional closeness grows, not through constant excitement, but through ordinary life. One day, she sends you a picture of the sunset outside our office. The next day, she tells you she's exhausted before you even ask. A few days later, she calls just to laugh about something that happened on her way home. Nothing dramatic happened. She simply wanted you to be part of the moment. And I think that's easy to overlook because we're taught to look for grand gestures, the expensive dates, the long love letters, the dramatic confessions. But real connection rarely lives there every day. It lives in the ordinary, the moments that no one else would think are worth mentioning. I've noticed that when someone starts choosing you emotionally, they stop asking themselves whether every conversation is important enough to share. Instead, they simply share it. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling like someone they occasionally talk to. You started feeling like someone they naturally think of. Of course, this doesn't mean every message carries some hidden meaning. Sometimes people are simply friendly. Sometimes they're naturally talkative. That's why, once again, it's never about one conversation. It's about the pattern. Over time, you realize something has quietly changed. You aren't only hearing about birthdays, promotions, or family celebrations. You're hearing about Tuesday afternoons, the coffee that tasted terrible, the song that's been stuck in her head all morning, the cashier who accidentally made her laugh. Those little moments might seem forgettable, but they're actually revealing something much bigger. She's no longer inviting you into the highlights of her life. She's inviting you into life itself. And I've always thought that's one of the clearest signs that someone has stopped seeing you as an outsider. You're becoming part of their everyday world. The interesting thing is, when that kind of comfort begins to grow, another quiet change usually follows. The need to impress you slowly starts disappearing. Because once someone feels accepted, they stop spending so much energy trying to appear perfect. And that's where the third sign begins.
Number 3. She stops trying to look perfect around you. When you first meet someone, it's completely normal to put your best foot forward. You think a little longer before sending a message. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder if you said the right thing. Everyone does it. We're all hoping to make a good first impression. But something interesting happens when someone begins to feel genuinely safe with you. The performance slowly disappears. Not all at once, little by little. She stops apologizing every time she has a bad day. She'll call you when she's tired, instead of waiting until she's in a better mood. She'll laugh so hard she snorts, then laugh even harder because she knows you saw it. One afternoon, she might send you a photo of herself after a long day, hair a mess, no makeup, and no explanation. Not because she's trying to prove anything, because she isn't thinking about whether you expect perfection anymore. She's simply being herself. And then there's a moment that says even more than that. You're on a call, and she tells you she's been crying over something she knows sounds silly. She doesn't hide it. She doesn't wait until she feels better to reach out. She reaches out because crying in front of you has stopped feeling like something she needs to protect you from. That's a much bigger change than it seems. The beginning of a relationship is often filled with carefully chosen moments. People naturally hide the things they think are unattractive, the bad habits, the awkward stories, the moments they're not proud of. Not because they're unhonest, because they're still trying to figure out if it's safe to be fully seen.
Then one day, she tells you she handled something badly. She admits she overreacted. She laughs about an embarrassing mistake instead of pretending it never happened. And for the first time, you realize she isn't trying to protect the image you have of her. She's trusting you with the real version. I think that's one of the biggest differences between attraction and emotional security. Attraction asks, will they still like me if I show them this? Emotional security quietly says, I don't have to hide this anymore. That's a beautiful place to reach with another person, because pretending is exhausting. Trying to look composed every minute, trying to have the perfect answer, trying to never make mistakes. It's hard to keep that up forever. Real closeness begins the moment someone realizes they don't have to. Of course, this doesn't mean she suddenly stops caring about herself or stops wanting to look nice. That's not the point. The point is that she no longer feels like your affection depends on getting everything right. She doesn't need every conversation to be impressive. She doesn't need every photo to be perfect. She doesn't need every day to be her best day. She trusts that you can handle the ordinary version of her, the version that gets frustrated, gets tired, changes her mind, has doubts, the version everyone has, but not everyone feels comfortable revealing. When someone reaches that level of comfort, something quietly shifts. The relationship stops feeling like an audition. It starts feeling like home. And when that happens, something else begins. Something she does not plan, something she probably does not even notice at first. But once it starts, it becomes the clearest sign of all.
Number 4. You become the first person she wants to tell. There's a moment that doesn't get talked about very often. It isn't the moment she says she likes you. It isn't the moment she introduces you to everyone she knows. It's much quieter than that. Something happens, and before she's even fully processed it herself, she thinks of you. Maybe she's leaving work after a long day. A customer says something that makes her laugh. She smiles for a second, takes out her phone, and sends you a message. Not because the story is extraordinary, because telling you somehow feels like the natural ending to it. The same thing happens when life isn't going so well. She has a frustrating day. An interview doesn't go the way she hoped. A family member says something that's been sitting heavily on her mind. She doesn't call because she expects you to fix any of it. Some problems don't have solutions. Sometimes people simply want one person who understands why it mattered. That's what makes this different. You slowly become the place where her experiences land, the person she wants to celebrate with before the excitement fades, the person she wants to vent to before carrying the weight alone, the person who comes to mind when she sees something beautiful, ridiculous, or completely unexpected. Think about how instinct works. Nobody teaches you who to think of first. It just happens. Your mind quietly learns, this is the person I want beside me for this. That's why I don't think emotional closeness is measured by how often two people talk. It's revealed by who comes to mind when life happens. There's something deeply personal about that. Because attention is one thing, instinct is another. Attention can be polite, instinct is honest. You don't rehearse it, you don't plan it, it simply appears before you've had time to think. And perhaps that's why this sign feels so meaningful. She's no longer sharing life because the conversation needs to continue. She's sharing it because somewhere along the way, life started feeling better when you were included in it. Not every victory becomes bigger, not every difficult day becomes easier, but both somehow feel more complete when you're part of them. I think that's the difference people often miss. Being chosen isn't always announced with a sentence. Sometimes it's revealed by habit, by the quiet, automatic decision to let one person witness the little moments that make up an ordinary life. When that begins to happen, you're no longer just someone she enjoys talking to. You've become someone she naturally wants beside her as life unfolds. And maybe that's what being chosen really looks like. Not a single unforgettable moment, but hundreds of ordinary ones that slowly make one person impossible to replace. Because when someone quietly makes you the first person they think of, they have already given you their answer, long before either of you found the words to say it out loud. So I'd love to ask you something. Looking back on your own life, what's the smallest thing someone shared with you that made you realize you mattered more than you thought? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read them.